Quickly, the United States has treaties with over 100 countries that define what tariffs can be and what its trade relations can be. One of the biggest of these current treaties is called NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was negotiated during the Clinton years when Bill Clinton was president. Okay? Donald Trump said we got to replace NAFTA. Actually, just to be clear on this, when Barack Obama was running for president in 2008, he said we needed to renegotiate NAFTA and that he would do that as president and didn't. But when you sign an agreement in the 90s, over time, conditions change, and you're going to want to change that agreement. And so it's time. I think pretty much everybody agrees that it was time to update NAFTA. So we replaced NAFTA with this USMCA. I hate that because that's the Marine Corps. It shouldn't be a trade agreement. But that's US, Mexico, and Canada, USMCA. Okay? What it does is it lowers or gets rid of the tariffs. And there aren't any really tariffs now between the US and Mexico and US and Canada, except in certain situations. And so the idea is to keep that. Right? So the USMCA doesn't get rid of the tariffs. The tariffs are already gone. The USMCA keeps them gone. All right? One of the things that's a big deal in the USMCA that wasn't in the in NAFTA is protection of intellectual property. Okay? Intellectual property is patents and copyrights and that kind of thing, and they weren't being protected by all the countries in the NAFTA agreement. There wasn't anything to protect our patents. Okay? Now there is. So, for example, a drug company doesn't have to worry that some company in Mexico is going to make a generic version of that drug and not pay for doing it. Right? So that protects intellectual property. Cars are a big deal. We have the factories in the U.S., but a lot of the car parts come from Mexico. Typical workers in Mexico make between $3 and $4 an hour working in a factory in Mexico. Okay. There is currently an agreement that to have no tariff, a car has to have 62.5% of its content come from North America. Okay? Now, it doesn't tell you, there's a sticker on your car that tells you where the content came from, domestic content, but you don't actually know what country produced it, right? Just saying. So that sticker implies that you're buying a U.S. car when maybe you aren't. All right? But anyway, the Democrats said, look, we're not going to sign a new NAFTA. Congress has to agree. The president, and if you see this up here, those three guys sitting down, that's the president of Mexico on the left, that's the president of the United States in the middle, and the prime minister of Canada on the right. So that's actually MUSCA. But either way. Okay? Those are the three there. Right? Just because they signed it doesn't mean it's in effect. As I speak, it's not in effect. NAFTA is still in effect. And the reason why USMCA isn't in effect is it has to get voted on by Congress. It has to be approved. All treaties have to get approved by the Senate. And in this case, sometimes we agree that both the House and the Senate are going to both vote on treaties. So it has to get voted on, has to get approved. Well, the Democrats weren't going to vote for the original idea of this treaty. What they wanted, what isn't in the original NAFTA, are two things. One is that there's no environmental protections in the original NAFTA. And there's still no environmental protections really in the USMCA. So they wanted that, they didn't get that. But there's no labor protections in NAFTA. So Mexican workers can't unionize. They get paid low wages. They don't get, right, there's child labor, there's stuff. So the Democrats said, if you want us to approve this, you have to change the labor rules in Mexico. And they did. Okay? So A minimum of 40% of the parts from North America have to be from North American workers making $16 an hour or more. So the Mexican workers are making $3 to $4 an hour now. Some of them are going to get raises up to $16 an hour. I don't think we really expect that U.S. companies are going to move their parts operations to the U.S. and try to pay American workers $16 an hour to make car parts. We assume that they're going to raise the wages of Mexican workers. But there's other provisions in there about labor, and so however it works out, some workers in North America are going to be better off. We don't know if those workers are in the United States or not, but some workers in North America, and a lot of Mexican workers for sure, are going to get paid a lot more money. So they should be happier. They changed the 62.5% North American content to 75%. And the idea there is that the global manufacturers, Toyotas and Hondas and BMWs, will build more factories in the United States to do that. So they'll import fewer vehicles and they'll make more of their vehicles in the United States. Toyota's planning an expansion of their operations in the United States. You need to understand the world we live in. One of the things when I have friends who say, oh, these companies are so bad, these foreign companies. I say to them, what company exports the most cars out of the United States? What car company exports cars built in the United States, exports the most cars built in the United States, exports them out of the United States? And the answer to that question is BMW. Right? It's not General Motors, it's not Ford. The largest exporter of cars from the United States to the rest of the world is BMW. Okay? So we live in this highly globalized world, but we should see from going from 62.5% to 75%, we should see some additional investment in factories in the United States. Okay? Now, what do both those things mean for consumers? Well, if your car the parts in your car are being made by a worker who is getting paid $4 an hour, and now that worker is going to get paid $16 an hour, what's going to happen to the cost of the car parts? Well, yeah, they're going to go up. So if all the parts are more expensive, what's going to happen to the price of the car that you want to buy? Yeah. So this USMCA, this great trade deal, is going to raise the price of cars in the United States. How much, nobody knows, but it's certainly going to raise the price of cars in the United States. Now, one interesting side note on this is that the United States under the Obama administration had been part of something called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Okay? And that Trans-Pacific Partnership exists. 14 countries signed it, sealed it, operate under it. The United States, the Trump administration, very first week in office, said, nope, we're out, and canceled the U.S. participation in the TPP. Okay? And I'm going to say two things about that. Number one, this has been bad for the U.S. Welch's grape juice. Welch's used to sell lots of grapes into Japan. They can't sell grape juice into Japan anymore because there's tariffs from Japan on grape juice being sold into Japan. But if you have South American grapes, you can sell that juice into Japan without tariffs. So it's been, not being in it's been bad for Americans. There was a problem with the TPP that there wasn't. How do you enforce these agreements, these international agreements? So there was this agreement, but there really wasn't any enforcement. How do you make it happen? And so the argument against TPP was, you're going to sign this agreement and it's worthless. We're going to follow it. They're not going to follow it, and it's going to end up bad for us. Okay? However, just to bring up a point here, just to show you that all these things are complicated, a great deal of the language in the USMCA is copied word for word from TPP. So the USMCA is a smaller TPP. So we didn't like TPP, but we liked the language of it enough that we put it into the USMCA. Okay? Moving on. We also signed this deal with China. Remember, China was buying tens of billions of dollars worth of agricultural products from the United States, and they stopped. So they signed this great new agreement, and what it says is that China is going to buy more agricultural products from the U.S. than they were buying before for 2 years. Just for 2 years. And it also says, though, that they can avoid doing that if there isn't market demand. So I personally assume that China ain't going to buy nothing from us, that they weren't going to buy anyhow, and this is all for show. Okay? This agreement with China does ease the licensing. Remember, licenses are used to control trade. It makes it easier for U.S. agricultural exporters to get licenses in China. It doesn't mean that those people necessarily can sell in China, but it does make it easier to get the licenses. There is some attempt to protect intellectual property, but there isn't really, again, an enforcement mechanism. How do you make China do what they say they're going to do? What's the deal? Okay? And again, the only weapon we have that's in this agreement is tariffs. And the problem is, again, if the Chinese airline industry is stealing Boeing's patents, the only way we have is to go after farm products and consumer products. And so we've been fighting over intellectual property, but it's the farmers who have suffered. Let me say that again. U.S. farmers have suffered. We had record numbers of farms go bankrupt in 2018 and 2019. Each year, we set a new record for farm bankruptcies. But it's a fight over intellectual property, and it's a fight over, right? It's not a fight. Those farmers were selling a lot of stuff to China. They were doing what we wanted them to do, and yet they're the ones that are suffering while we try to fight, right? Nothing is ever free. There's always costs and benefits and trade-offs and whatever. Okay? This agreement really doesn't do anything about exchange rate manipulation. That's been a problem. And again, nobody's actually sure how you enforce this thing. Okay? But it doesn't mean you shouldn't try, right? Free and fair. That's the way we want things to be. We don't want to take advantage. We want things to be free and fair between the U.S. and other countries. It's hard to do.